I had never thought that spending time like this with Max, my dog, while Ethan, my husband, was away, could turn into such an unforgettable evening. It all began a few weeks ago when Ethan left me and Max at the house, heading out on another business trip. The house always felt unnervingly quiet when he was gone, a kind of silence that seemed to amplify the emptiness around me. Over the years, I had grown used to this pattern. His business trips were a regular occurrence, often lasting several days or even weeks. I couldn't fault his work. It provided for our comfortable suburban lifestyle, our expansive backyard, and the house that, more often than not, felt like it was just for Max and me. Max, our loyal Labrador, had been with us for over 5 years. We had brought him home as a clumsy, energetic puppy, and since then, he had become my steady companion. While Ethan's job kept him tied up with long hours or faraway meetings, Max was always there. He greeted me with a wagging tail, a warm nuzzle, and those soulful brown eyes that seemed to understand more than a dog ever should. Tonight was one of those nights when the quiet of the house felt especially suffocating. I tried to fill the silence with music, television, and even an audiobook, but nothing worked. Dinner was a lonely affair, a reheated plate of leftovers from the previous night. Afterward, I curled up on the couch with a glass of wine in hand, while Max lay sprawled across the floor near my feet. He always stayed close, as if sensing how much I needed his presence during these solitary evenings. Reaching down, I rested my hand on his soft, golden fur. "Looks like it's just you and me tonight, huh?" I murmured, my voice barely audible. Max let out a soft, contented sigh, his tail thumping gently against the floor in response. The bond we shared had always been unique. Max was more than a pet. He was my confidant, the one who filled the empty spaces left by Ethan's frequent absences. Over time, I'd realized how deeply I leaned on him for comfort. It wasn't just his loyalty or his gentle disposition. It was the way he seemed to see me, to understand the emotions I couldn't put into words. The evening dragged on, the minutes creeping by at a torturous pace. I scrolled aimlessly through my phone, glancing at photos of friends with their families, their happy smiles a stark contrast to the solitude that surrounded me. Their lives were full of noise and chaos, a stark contrast that made the silence in my own life feel even more profound. Max shifted beside me, resting his head on my lap, and I couldn't help but smile. At least I wasn't completely alone. My fingers glided through his soft fur, the warmth of his body a quiet comfort against mine. "You're such a good boy," I murmured gently. His tail wagged in response, and he let out a contented sigh. Moments like these made me grateful for him, for the uncomplicated and unconditional love he gave so freely. It wasn't the same as having Ethan here, but it was enough to make the loneliness a little more bearable. Eventually, the wine began to weave its soothing spell, softening the sharp edges of my thoughts as I sank further into the couch. Max adjusted himself again, curling up closer to me, as if his presence could shield me from the emptiness of the house. I reached down, my hand trailing along his back, and before I even realized it, I began talking to him. "You know, Max, sometimes I wonder if Ethan even notices how much time he spends away," I said, my voice quieter now, tinged with a hint of vulnerability. "I mean, I understand. He's busy, he's doing what he has to do, but sometimes I just wish he'd be here." Max's ears twitched at my words, and he lifted his head to look at me, his brown eyes filled with an uncanny sense of understanding that sent a pang through my chest. It was absurd, of course, to believe he truly comprehended my feelings, but in that moment, it felt so real. "You get it, don't you?" I continued, my hand still moving rhythmically through his fur. "You're here. You always are." The room grew quieter, the only sounds the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft rhythm of Max's breathing. My hand rested on his side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest, a grounding presence I hadn't realized I needed. The oppressive silence of the house seemed to ease with him beside me, transforming into something almost comforting. As the night stretched on, I found my thoughts drifting back to the life Ethan and I had built together. It wasn't bad by any means. We had a lovely home, financial stability, and a routine that worked for the most part. But somewhere along the way, that life had started to feel hollow, as though something vital was missing. I couldn't quite pinpoint when it began, but the distance between Ethan and me had grown a silent chasm neither of us seemed willing to confront. Max nudged my hand with his nose, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced down at him and smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Thanks, buddy," I said, scratching behind his ears. "You always know when I need you, don't you?" His tail wagged, and his eyes sparkled with a warmth that sent a bittersweet ache through my chest. Moments like these reminded me just how much Max meant to me and how deeply he had become intertwined with my life in ways I hadn't expected. He wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline, a constant presence reminding me I wasn't truly alone. I stayed curled up on the couch with Max for hours, his presence easing the weight of the evening until it didn't feel so heavy anymore. By the time I finally rose to head to bed, I felt lighter, more at peace. As always, Max followed me, his steady steps trailing close behind. He settled into his bed at the foot of mine, his familiar spot. Turning off the light and sinking into the mattress, I whispered into the quiet, "Good night, Max. Thanks for being here." And then something hit me, an unexplainable jolt. The way his eyes looked at me in that moment stirred something inside. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the loneliness, or perhaps it was the restless longing for a spark of excitement in the solitude. I didn't understand it then, not fully, but soon enough, I would. That realization would lead me down paths I never thought I'd tread. The next morning, I woke to the rhythmic thumping of Max's tail against the floor. He always seemed to know when I needed an extra nudge to start the day. His golden eyes peered over the edge of the bed, and I couldn't help but smile as he let out a soft, cheerful bark, as if to say, "Good morning, let's get moving." I swung my legs over the side of the bed, leaning down to scratch his head as he nuzzled against me. All right, I'm up," I said with a laugh. Max darted toward the bedroom door, pausing to glance back at me as if to make sure I was following. It had become our routine, his quiet way of insisting that life goes on, even when the house felt too big and far too quiet without Ethan around. After breakfast, Max trotted to the sliding glass door that led to the backyard, his tail wagging in anticipation of the day ahead. I grabbed Max's leash from the hook by the door, and his excitement became palpable, his entire body practically vibrating with energy. A walk was exactly what I needed to clear my head and shake off the lingering weight of last night's thoughts. The neighborhood was just beginning to stir, the streets quiet save for the occasional chirping of birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Max stayed close to my side as we walked, his leash slack, his steps in perfect rhythm with mine. It was one of the things I loved most about him, his calm, steady presence. Even when my world felt chaotic, Max had a way of grounding me, reminding me to stay present and focus on the moment. As we approached the park, I decided to let him off the leash. He bounded ahead, his ears flopping joyfully as he ran. Watching him like that, so carefree and full of life, brought an unbidden smile to my face. His happiness had a way of lightening my own mood. I found a nearby bench, sat down, and let the warmth of the morning sun wash over me while keeping an eye on him. Max was chasing a squirrel now, his movements more playful than predatory. "You're ridiculous, you know that?" I called out with a laugh. He stopped, turned, and trotted back toward me, his tail wagging furiously, his tongue lolling out of his mouth. Flopping down at my feet, he let out a contented sigh. For a while, we just sat there, soaking in the tranquil morning together. As often happened when it was just the two of us, I found myself talking to Max. There was something oddly comforting about it, as if he were a sounding board for the thoughts I didn't know how to share with anyone else. "I don't know, Max," I began, leaning down to rub his ears. "Do you ever think about what life would be like if things were different? If we weren't stuck in the same routine day after day?" He looked up at me with those big, expressive eyes, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like he was truly listening. It was silly, of course, to think he could understand the complexities of my thoughts. But in moments like this, it felt almost possible. "I mean, don't get me wrong," I continued, my hand idly stroking his fur. "I'm grateful for what we have, but sometimes it feels like something's missing, you know?" I sighed, leaning back against the bench. "Ethan, he's a good man, but he's always gone. And when he's here, it's like we're just going through the motions." Max let out a soft whine, resting his head on my knee. A pang of guilt surged through me. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching down to scratch the top of his head. "You shouldn't have to listen to me ramble about all this." But Max didn't seem to mind. He stayed right there, his head on my knee, his tail wagging slowly and steadily, as if to reassure me. Moments like these reminded me just how much I depended on him, not just as a pet, but as a companion, a friend who was always there when I needed him most. As the morning wore on, we made our way back home. I spent the rest of the day tackling chores, the kind of mundane tasks that helped pass the time. Max followed me from room to room, his constant presence a quiet comfort. No matter where I went, he would flop down in the corner, his eyes tracking my every move, as if silently saying, "I'm here. Don't worry." Later that evening, after dinner, I found myself back on the couch with Max curled up beside me. The loneliness that usually hung heavy during Ethan's absences was still there, but it didn't feel as oppressive as it had the night before. Max had a way of filling the empty spaces, of making the silence less unbearable. But even then, there was still something missing. And each time I glanced at Max, it was as if he was telling me he could fill that void. I reached down to stroke his fur, letting my fingers trail along the soft waves of his coat. "You're a lifesaver, you know that?" I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Max let out a gentle sigh, his tail thumping lazily against the couch. I smiled, leaning back and finally allowing myself to relax for the first time all day. The warmth of Max's body against mine was grounding, a quiet comfort that nothing else seemed to provide. As the evening wore on, I found myself reflecting on the bond we shared. It wasn't just his loyalty or companionship, though those were undeniably a part of it. It was the way Max seemed to truly see me, to understand me in a way that felt almost human. He was more than just a dog. He was a reminder that even in the quietest, loneliest moments, I wasn't entirely alone. We stayed on the couch long after the sun had dipped below the horizon, the two of us wrapped in the quiet warmth of our shared space. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself, but in that moment, it felt like enough. The days blurred together, the routine of my life steady but uninspiring. Ethan's return was delayed yet again, another business trip stretching longer than planned. I told myself I was fine with it. After all, I'd grown used to his absences. But as the days dragged on, I found myself leaning on Max more and more. It was late in the afternoon when I stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing dishes, while Max sprawled in the doorway, his ears flicking in response to the faint sounds of the neighborhood. Golden light poured through the window, bathing the room in warmth, but I still felt a chill deep inside. My thoughts wandered, weighed down by the familiar ache of loneliness, until I finally broke the silence. "Max," I called softly, my voice barely audible. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine with a look that seemed to sense the shift in my mood. I exhaled and grabbed his leash. "Let's get out of here." With no particular destination in mind, I led Max to the car. The act of leaving the house felt like a small rebellion against the monotony of the day. Max sat in the passenger seat, his head out the window, his fur ruffling in the breeze. His infectious joy lifted my spirits, and for the first time that day, I found myself smiling. Eventually, we arrived at a nature reserve on the outskirts of town. The walking trails were quiet, the kind of place where the only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. I let Max off his leash, watching as he bounded ahead, his tail wagging with uncontainable enthusiasm. He had always loved the outdoors, and seeing him so full of energy and joy eased the ache that had settled in my chest. I followed him down the winding trail, the soft crunch of gravel beneath my feet grounding me in the present. Max darted between the trees, pausing now and then to glance back at me, as if to make sure I was still there. His excitement was infectious, and for the first time in what felt like days, I felt a sense of calm washing over me, the tension in my shoulders easing as I breathed in the crisp, clean air. As we walked, my thoughts drifted to the life I had built with Ethan. I loved him, or at least I thought I did, but lately, that love felt more like a routine than a feeling, a quiet companionship that no longer held the spark it once did. In his absence, it had been Max who filled the void, his unwavering loyalty soothing the restlessness of my heart in ways I hadn't anticipated. We came across a quiet clearing, and I found a seat on a fallen log, watching as Max explored the area. His tail wagged as he sniffed around, his curiosity endless, and his joy infectious. Eventually he wandered back to me, flopping down at my feet with a contented sigh. Reaching down, I scratched behind his ears, smiling as he nuzzled against my hand. His warm, steady presence grounded me once again. "You're my rock, you know that?" I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Max lifted his head, his expressive brown eyes meeting mine with a warmth that made my chest tighten. Moments like this reminded me just how much he meant to me, how his presence had become a lifeline in a world that often felt too quiet. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the clearing, I stayed there with Max. The two of us were cocooned in the peace of the moment, where time seemed to slow, and for once, the silence felt like solace rather than loneliness. The world outside the reserve seemed to fade away until it was just Max and me. In that stillness, I felt an unfamiliar sense of clarity, as though the weight of my thoughts had been lifted, leaving me free to simply exist. As we made our way back to the car, I realized how much I had needed this escape from the house, from the routine, and from the endless thoughts that had been circling in my mind. Max trotted beside me, his steps perfectly in sync with mine, and a wave of gratitude washed over me. He wasn't just my dog, he was my constant, my anchor, the one thing that made the loneliness bearable. The drive home was quiet, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Max curled up in the passenger seat, his head resting on his paws, his steady, rhythmic breathing filling the silence. I reached over and rested my hand on his back, feeling a peace I hadn't realized I was searching for. When we arrived home, the house felt less empty, less oppressive. Max followed me inside, his tail wagging happily as he settled onto his bed near the couch. I sank into the cushions, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and felt a quiet sense of contentment. The bond I shared with Max was unlike anything else in my life, pure, uncomplicated, and unwavering. That night, as I lay in bed with Max curled up at my feet, I found myself reflecting on the connection we shared. It wasn't something I could easily put into words, but it was real tangible in a way that filled the empty spaces left by Ethan's absence. Max wasn't just a dog to me. He was my partner, my confidant, and in many ways, my closest friend. For now, that was enough, or was it? The following night, as darkness fell, it seemed heavier, more impenetrable than usual. The kind of inky blackness that enveloped the house seemed to press against the windows, wrapping everything in an oppressive stillness. The air felt heavy, charged, as though a storm lingered just beyond the horizon. Max padded silently beside me as I moved through the house, his quiet presence a grounding force. I hadn't bothered to turn on the lights, letting the faint glow of the moon guide my steps as I made my way to the couch. I sank into the cushions, and Max immediately settled beside me, resting his head on my lap. The silence in the house felt overwhelming, a stark reminder of how much space Ethan occupied even when he wasn't here. My hand drifted to Max's fur, stroking it absent-mindedly as my thoughts swirled. "You're all I have right now," I murmured, my voice barely audible in the stillness. Max let out a soft huff, his tail thumping gently against the couch. He lifted his head to look at me, his golden eyes filled with an understanding that sent an ache through my chest. I exhaled shakily, my hand stilling on his fur. "It's just us, isn't it? You and me," I whispered, the words heavier than I intended. Max didn't seem to mind. Instead, he nuzzled closer, his warmth seeping into me as the weight of my loneliness pressed harder. There was something different about our connection that night, something stronger, more profound. It wasn't just the comfort of his presence or the way he seemed to mirror my every emotion. It was deeper than that, a bond that defied words or logic. I leaned back into the couch, closing my eyes as I let myself sink into the moment, the quiet, the warmth of Max's body against mine. Time seemed to blur as we stayed like that, the two of us cocooned in the stillness. My hand drifted to his head, my fingers tracing along the soft contours of his fur. My fingers traced the soft curve of Max's ears, and he let out a low, contented sigh, his tail wagging gently against the couch. The steady rhythm of his breathing filled the room, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. I opened my eyes, glancing down at him, and his gaze met mine. For a fleeting moment, everything else faded away. The room, the empty house, the ache of Ethan's absence. It all dissolved, leaving just the two of us. My hand lingered on his head, my fingers brushing through his fur as an inexplicable pull settled deep within me. The connection was so strong, it left me breathless. Max shifted closer, his warmth a soothing balm to the cold emptiness that had taken root in my chest. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forehead against his. Closing my eyes again, I let the moment wash over me, a mix of comfort and longing, gratitude, and something deeper that I couldn't quite name. "I don't know what I'd do without you," I whispered, my voice trembling ever so slightly. Max responded with a soft nuzzle, his nose brushing gently against my cheek. His tail wagged once more, as though he understood, as though he felt the same unspoken bond that had grown between us. The minutes stretched on, the world outside forgotten as I stayed there with Max. The connection between us wrapped around me like a lifeline. It wasn't just his presence, his loyalty, or his constant companionship. It was the way he made me feel seen, understood in a way I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't sure how long we stayed like that, but when I finally pulled back, my heart was racing, and my breaths came shallow and uneven. Max's eyes locked onto mine, his expression calm yet intense, as though he were waiting for something. My hand lingered on his head, my fingers drifting down to his collar as I struggled to put into words what I was feeling. But there were no words for this, no way to articulate the depth of what Max had come to mean to me, how his presence had filled the empty spaces in my life. All I could do was sit there, my hand resting on his fur, my heart pounding as I tried to make sense of the moment. Eventually, I leaned back against the couch, my hand still on Max as he settled beside me once more. The weight of the moment lingered, a quiet reminder of the bond we shared, of how he had become so much more than just a dog to me. As the night wore on, a sense of clarity washed over me, not born of logic, but something deeper, more instinctive. Max had always been my anchor, my constant in a world that often felt too chaotic, too lonely. And in that moment, I realized just how much I needed him, not just as a companion, but as a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone. The house remained silent as I finally made my way to bed, Max trailing close behind. He curled up at the foot of the bed, his quiet presence reassuring me that I wasn't entirely alone. Lying there in the darkness, my thoughts continued to swirl, but my heart felt a little lighter, a little more at peace. As I drifted off to sleep, I whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, Max, for everything." He looked at me in a way that seemed to reflect my own feelings of loneliness, the desire for something more, for excitement. His gaze spoke volumes, as though he was telling me he could give me what I craved when Ethan was away. Something deep within me shifted, leaving me questioning whether I should resist or give in to the temptation. I shook my head, whispering to myself, "No, I can't do this." But a part of me, an undeniable part, wanted to find out. Perhaps later, I would give in. But not yet. I wasn't ready. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, casting a warm, golden glow across the room, as though the day held the promise of something new. I blinked awake, the weight of the previous night still lingering in the recesses of my mind. Max was already awake, sitting patiently by the bed, his tail sweeping the floor in slow, deliberate movements. "Morning, buddy," I murmured, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. He leaned into my hand, his warm breath brushing against my wrist. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. As I moved through the house, getting ready for the day, Max followed me from room to room. His quiet presence was a constant comfort, grounding me in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until now. The events of the night before remained vivid and raw, as though they had etched themselves into my memory. Something had shifted between us, something fundamental, though I couldn't yet pinpoint what it meant. After breakfast, I found myself back on the couch, Max resting at my feet. The silence in the house felt different today, less oppressive, more like a cocoon than an empty void. My fingers trailed through Max's fur, the repetitive motion calming as my mind wandered, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling within me. For years, I had buried my feelings, pushing them down beneath the surface to keep life moving smoothly. But Max had a way of pulling them away from me, making me confront the loneliness I had tried so hard to ignore. His unwavering loyalty, his quiet understanding, it had been a lifeline, one I hadn't realized I needed until it was too late. Max was looking at me with those eyes again, and all of a sudden, I just couldn't resist it anymore. We had a bond so close, I just needed to give in. It was as if he was telling me that he could fill my void of loneliness with some excitement. I leaned in towards him, and he immediately knew. I kissed him, and there was such a tension between us that I can't quite name. His tail was moving very fast, and of course, I can't go into full details, but I can tell that I let myself go. I went on my knees and turned around. Wow, when Max was doing his thing, I could have never imagined that it could be that good. The bond we shared even strengthened what we were doing. It was so amazing. After, I think, 30 to 40 minutes, he finished, and I sighed, leaning back against the cushions. "What are we doing, Max?" I asked softly, my voice tinged with a mix of wonder and confusion. He looked up at me, his golden eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, it felt like he was waiting for an answer too. The rest of the day passed in a haze of mundane tasks and fleeting moments of clarity. I folded laundry, cleaned the kitchen, and walked Max through the neighborhood, all the while feeling the weight of the bond we shared pressing against me. It wasn't something I could ignore anymore, no matter how hard I tried. By the time evening rolled around, I felt restless, a nervous energy thrumming through me that I couldn't quite shake. I grabbed Max's leash and headed out the door, needing to clear my head. The air was crisp and cool, the faint scent of wood smoke drifting on the breeze as we made our way to the park. The paths were quiet, lit only by the soft glow of the street lamps and the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. Max trotted beside me, his step steady and confident as he matched my pace. I let him lead the way, trusting his instincts, as we wandered deeper into the park. We eventually found ourselves at a secluded clearing, the grass damp with dew, and the air humming with the quiet sounds of the night. I sat down on a bench, Max settling at my feet, his body warm against the coolness of the evening air. Overhead, the stars sparkled brightly, scattered across the sky like shards of glass, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from my shoulders. Max shifted slightly, resting his head on my knee, and I reached down to stroke his fur. The familiar motion grounded me, a soothing balm to my restless thoughts. "You've always been here for me, haven't you?" I murmured softly, my voice carrying in the stillness of the night. Max responded with a quiet whine, his tail thumping gently against the ground. It was such a small gesture, yet it filled my chest with a warmth that pushed back the lingering shadows of doubt and loneliness. Max wasn't just my dog, he was my partner, my anchor, my constant in a world that so often felt too vast and too empty. As the minutes stretched into hours, I found myself speaking aloud, the words spilling out as though a dam had finally broken. I told Max about my fears and doubts, about the ache of a marriage that had become more routine than connection. I spoke of the countless nights spent alone, of the moments when his presence had been the only thing holding me together. Through it all, Max stayed by my side, his quiet presence a reminder that I wasn't truly alone. His loyalty, his unwavering love, it was unlike anything I'd ever known. It filled the spaces in my heart I hadn't realized were empty. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt hollow. Instead, it was full of meaning, a comforting stillness that resonated deeply. Max curled up in the passenger seat, his eyes slowly closing as the steady rhythm of the road lulled him to sleep. I glanced over at him, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips, and reached out to brush my fingers gently against his fur. When we arrived home, the house felt different, warmer, more inviting than it had in weeks. Max followed me to the couch, where he settled beside me as I curled up beneath a soft blanket. The quiet companionship we shared was enough, a reassuring reminder that even in my loneliest moments, I wasn't truly alone. I let my head rest against the back of the couch, my fingers tracing absent patterns through Max's fur. "You're my rock," I whispered, my voice carrying the weight of everything I couldn't put into words. I sat down on a bench, Max settling at my feet, his warm body a comforting contrast to the coolness of the evening air. Above us, the stars scattered across the sky like shards of glass, their brightness cutting through the darkness. For a brief moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from my shoulders. Max shifted slightly, resting his head on my knee, and I instinctively reached down to stroke his fur. The familiar motion grounded me, a soothing ritual in the stillness of the night. "You've always been here for me, haven't you?" I whispered softly, my voice carrying in the quiet air. Max responded with a low whine, his tail wagging gently against the ground. It was such a small thing, yet it filled my chest with warmth, chasing away the lingering shadows of doubt and loneliness. Max wasn't just my dog, he was my partner, my anchor, the constant in a world that often felt too vast and too empty. As the minutes stretched into hours, the words began to spill out, unstoppable, like water breaking through a dam. I told Max about my fears and my doubts, about the ache of a marriage that had become more routine than connection. I spoke of the long, quiet nights, the moments when his presence was the only thing that kept me from falling apart. And through it all, Max remained by my side, his quiet presence a reassurance that I wasn't truly alone. His loyalty and love were unlike anything I had ever known, filling spaces in my heart I hadn't realized were empty. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't the emptiness I had felt so many times before. It was a silence filled with meaning, a peaceful stillness that resonated deeply. Max curled up in the passenger seat, his eyes slowly closing as the gentle rhythm of the road lulled him to sleep. I glanced over at him, a soft smile tugging at my lips, and reached out to brush my fingers gently along his fur. When we arrived home, the house felt different, warmer, more inviting than it had in weeks. Max followed me to the couch, where he settled beside me as I curled up beneath a blanket. The quiet companionship we shared was enough a reminder that even in the loneliest moments, I wasn't truly alone. I leaned back against the couch, letting my head rest as my fingers traced idle patterns through Max's fur. "You're my rock," I whispered, the words soft but heavy with meaning, a quiet acknowledgement of everything he had become to me. I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You've always been my rock." Max shifted closer, his body pressed against mine, and his tail wagged softly in response. The connection between us was undeniable, a bond that transcended words or explanations. It was something I didn't fully understand, but I knew it was real, and that was enough. As the hours passed, the house grew quieter, the world outside fading into the stillness of the night. I stayed on the couch with Max, his presence a steady comfort as I allowed myself to drift into a peaceful haze. Whatever the future held, I knew one thing for certain: Max would be there. His loyalty was unwavering, his love a constant in a world that often felt unpredictable. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity, a quiet certainty that I wasn't alone. As I drifted off to sleep, Max curled up beside me. I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. But as I lay there, a thought crept into my mind. Was it okay, what we had done? Am I just weird? Or is this something many people feel? I didn't have the answers. What do you think of it? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you.